Good afternoon, Veritas scientists. Today is Thursday, April 16th, 2020, and we are learning about the carbon cycle. Okay, so let's go back to yesterday's question before we get into my silly diagram that I drew here. It says, as we learned, coal is made up mostly of carbon. When coal is burned, carbon dioxide, or CO2, is released into the atmosphere. I asked you, what do you predict happens to the carbon dioxide, the CO2, that's released into the atmosphere? Okay, so when coal is burned, it releases carbon dioxide. My question is, what do you think happens to that carbon dioxide when it goes up into the atmosphere? Okay, and my hint was that today's lesson is going to be about the carbon cycle. So we're going to have to learn about the carbon cycle to help us answer what's going to happen to that carbon dioxide. Because there's not just one right answer, there's actually many correct answers. So first, today's Thursday, April 16th, we're learning about the carbon cycle. Let's read about the carbon cycle, and then I think my diagram will make it a lot more clear. So vocabulary, the carbon cycle. It says the process in which the element carbon, which is vital for all life on Earth, gets recycled and used by all living things as well as non-living things on Earth. Okay, so that's kind of a dense definition. Let me go back and we'll kind of break it down. The carbon cycle is the process in which carbon, which is vital for all life on Earth. That means life wouldn't exist on Earth without carbon. So we need carbon to be on the Earth. Okay, so it's super important. It's vital. It is necessary. We need it in order to have life of any type, whether it's plants or trees or people or other animals. We need carbon in order to have life on Earth. All right, and that carbon, through the carbon cycle, gets recycled and used by all living things and some non-living things like the coal that we talked about. Coal is not living anymore. It used to be. It's organic matter because at one point in time it was alive. It's not alive anymore, and there's still carbon there. But what we're really going to talk about today are all living things and how it is used, they all use carbon. Okay, so here's my diagram. Where to start? Let's see. So let's start with the coal, because our question was what happens when we burn the coal, what happens to the carbon dioxide? So we'll start with the factory. Okay, so we have this factory, it's burning coal in this example. So the fuel, it's burning it off and it's releasing the carbon dioxide, the gas, into the atmosphere. Okay, so that carbon dioxide ends up in the atmosphere. And through respiration, that's where trees basically use the carbon dioxide in order to make glucose through photosynthesis, right? So they make their own food using the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere. And they breathe out oxygen. Okay, so through respiration, that's called, is when the plants breathe in carbon dioxide, they breathe out oxygen. Okay, so now these trees and plants, they breathed in this carbon dioxide. So it went from the factory, we burned the carbon, it went into the atmosphere, then the carbon is now in trees and plants and flowers and grass and anything that is a producer. Okay, so like I said, they're giving off oxygen, which people are breathing in. We breathe in oxygen, and cows breathe in oxygen, animals, but we breathe out CO2. We breathe out carbon dioxide. So when you take a breath in, you're breathing in the oxygen, but then when you breathe out, you're breathing out carbon dioxide. So that carbon dioxide, again, is being released back into the atmosphere. So it can go from the factory into the atmosphere, to the trees, to us, back up into the atmosphere. All right, so there is a cycle here. So let's kind of continue with the trees, right? So eventually these trees are all alive, but when we've been talking about the formation of rocks and coal, we've been talking about like hundreds of millions of years, right? Really long time. So even in just a few hundred years, these trees are all going to be dead. So the dead trees are going to end up underground. There's going to be other dead plants and animals down there, like this fish and this cat. I don't know what that is. I think it's just a plant. That's dead. They end up underground. And the carbon that's in them, right? Remember we said that it is breathing in the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere. So some of that carbon is in the trees. All the trees you look around and see have carbon in them. So when they die, the carbon, just like when these animals die, the carbon ends up underground. Okay, some of that carbon will turn into fossil fuels such as coal. And other of that carbon will be used when new trees are born, right? Trees through the roots are going to be soaking in some of that carbon that's going to make new trees and new flowers and new grass and new plants, right? So once it's underground, that's not the end of the story, right? It then gets used again, okay? Let's see. So I drew a picture of fire here because fire, when we see ash, right, the black ash that we see when we have a fire is carbon. So when we have fires, we're actually releasing more of that carbon. That carbon was in the wood, which was from this tree that breathed it in from the atmosphere, right? That wood then gets burned, and that carbon that was in the wood, that was in the tree, now gets released again on the ground, right? Which will eventually make its way up into the atmosphere, and it'll go through this cycle again, okay? This is a car, so any automobile, any truck, any bus or train or boat or anything that uses fuel is going to release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So again, those fossil fuels that are being used, like oil and coal, natural gas, they're being used, they're being burned, and they are being released back into the atmosphere. Okay? So as you can see, that carbon continues to be cycled between all living things throughout the earth. And if we didn't have carbon, and if this carbon cycle didn't exist, then there would be no life on Earth. All right, so this is a very, very important cycle that we have happening on our Earth every day. Sometimes takes very, very long amount of time, but every time we breathe, we are actually contributing to this carbon cycle. All right, now let's look at the back on here. Let me know if you have any more questions about that. That was kind of the 5th grade version of the carbon cycle. It gets a lot more complicated. Like when you get to high school, you'll learn about the different layers of the atmosphere, like the lithosphere and different parts of the Earth, and how the carbon cycle affects them as well. One more point I wanted to make before we get to that question is that all of this drawing is above ground, right? The same carbon cycle is happening underwater. So in the oceans, it's happening as well. There are plants under the ocean. There are animals that live in the ocean. They are dying. They are breathing oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide as well. So this is all happening under the ocean as well. So any life in the ocean, I know that my drawing doesn't have any. I should have put like a pond over here, but I didn't have much space. That it's also happening there. So it's happening everywhere on the earth. And anything that's alive anywhere on the earth is because of the carbon cycle. All right. So Thursday, April 16th, here's a question I'd like you to think of, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. It says, imagine that you are a carbon atom that's stored in a piece of coal. So you're just a tiny, tiny little piece of carbon, and you are in coal. When the coal gets burned as fuel, where are 3 places that you might end up on Earth? Okay, so you're the carbon in the coal. When the coal gets burned, where are 3 places that you might end up on Earth? And I want you to explain why you would end up in those 3 places. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed my video. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.